All right, welcome to another episode of the What's in a Game podcast. We have a special two-part episode because we have so much to discuss. We're going to be reacting to the play-in games that just happened. We're going to be going through the first round of the NBA playoffs and talking about what teams have most at stake, and then give our picks for the entire playoffs, including who goes to the finals and who's going to come out on top. That will be our first part. And the second part will be going through all the NBA awards and talking about who deserves MVP, Coach of the Year, all of that. So please stick around and look out for that second part. So if you're here on YouTube, please like and subscribe to our new YouTube channel. And if you're listening on Spotify or anywhere where you're listening to a podcast, give us a rating. We really appreciate it. How are you doing, Grace?
I'm good. I'm excited. We had a really great couple of nights of postseason basketball. Not quite the playoffs yet, but the play-in games have been pretty intense for the most part, with a lot of at stake for all of the teams involved. So I'm excited
Yeah,
to get into it.
let's just jump in with the play-in. At this point, we are recording after the first play-in games in each conference. We have not seen um, Kings Pelicans or Bulls Heat yet, um, but I was obviously much more tuned into the Lakers Pelicans game since that was going to determine who the Nuggets were playing, and it was so close. I was pulling for the Pelicans just because I'm a little fatigued of Lakers Nuggets matchups, and I wanted to see a new matchup. But when Zion was pretty much playing hero ball and taking over the game, I was starting to worry like, do I really want him going at Aaron Gordon for a whole series as we're like kicking this off? But um, it definitely brought up a lot of questions in my minds with the Lakers and the Nuggets. What was stuff that stuck out to you?
Yeah, that game was really interesting because just a couple days prior, the Lakers had completely physically overwhelmed the Pelicans. Uh, Pretty similar to what we saw in that in-season tournament semifinal, where one team came ready to play and had a more balanced offensive attack, and it was the Lakers. But in this game, the Pelicans came ready to respond. I was really impressed with how they started this game. They were a lot more physical, especially with Anthony Davis to start. Willie Green didn't sub Valanciunas out early on like he did in the previous game for Larry Nance Jr., who's a much smaller center. And that allowed the Pelicans to rebound better. They were getting out and running, really taking advantages of breakdowns from the Lakers in transition defense as well. We've seen that throughout last season and this season that the Lakers struggle in that regard. And they were just playing with more pace, and it was clear that the Pelicans looked like not the more desperate team, but I think the Lakers maybe relaxed a little bit compared to how they started off the game on Sunday. Now, there was definitely a run sparked by LeBron in that second quarter that helped the Lakers get back into the game. And eventually they were able to take the lead going into in the second half. But LeBron used so much energy in the first half of that game to get them back in it that in that whole second half, the Lakers offense started to really like kind of crumble because D'Angelo Russell is not the most reliable offensive initiator in terms of decision making. And the thing with D'Angelo Russell is that when he's just making his tough shots, he's good, right? He can still contribute to the team despite his kind of shaky decision making and questionable defensive impact. I don't want to say effort because I do think that he is trying most of the time.
Yeah.
But the Pelicans were not able to play D'Lo off the floor defensively, and so he was able to just cook them. It really kind of reminded me of what I was saying about the Pelicans' perimeter defense uh, in our last episode of when we talked about Jamal, where I wouldn't necessarily classify D'Lo as shifty, but he doesn't really get to his shot with any particular kind of athleticism. He's a very skilled player and he can be pretty crafty, just kind of getting to his spots both on and off the ball. That's one of the things that really helps the Lakers offense flow is that even though I question D'Lo's on-ball decision making, he does move well off the ball, creates some gravity with his cuts that either opens him up or opens shots up for other guys. And the because the Pelicans weren't able to really counter that, he was kind of killing them in that second half,
Yeah.
both with tough shot making and with the way that he kept the offense flowing for the most part whenever they were organized. But I don't think that the Lakers were ever organized offensively on a consistent basis. Game comes
Yeah.
down to the wire, and the Pelicans are like the game is completely getting away from them. And Zion just goes absolutely bonkers. He was getting absolutely nothing from CJ or from Brandon Ingram, who was pretty bad in this game, particularly in the second half, offensively, just not really helping with the flow, not passing out. He wasn't applying any real rim pressure, just dribbling too much, trying to get to his tough shots. Sometimes he was making them in the first half, but he was missing them in the second half. And he was clearly very frustrated. Willie Green actually benched him down the stretch of this game. But Zion went very beast mode. He was the best player on the floor throughout the entire fourth quarter, especially because LeBron was so visibly out of energy after all he gave in the first half of that game. And Zion was just getting to the rim at will, and he was making everything over and around Anthony Davis. And I was just really impressed with that performance. Unfortunately for him, he did get injured on a play with about 3 minutes left in the game. They took a timeout and had to sub him out. And I believe, I don't know if we have the MRI yet, but they did say that it was a hamstring strain or tear that will likely sideline them for their next game. So in the end, the Lakers are able to barely pull that off. But I do think the Pelicans had a chance to win this game, and I wasn't really impressed overall with the Lakers down the stretch. I think that it's a real problem how reliant they are on LeBron to look like a consistently organized offense because
Yeah.
LeBron is 39 years
Yeah.
old.
Yeah. I mean, you said a ton of points about each of these Lakers players that I've been questioning going into the next series with the Nuggets, where like, how D'Lo looks moving off ball. That's going to be important for them because they're going to play him. They're not going to go into it being like D'Angelo Russell's not going to play versus the Nuggets because he's too important to their offense. And I mean, people have been talking about how the Lakers are switching more to an offensive identity as opposed to a defensive identity. So they're going to try and hit a lot of shots and threes. All of them are shooting better from three this year. So D'Angelo Russell getting looks off ball is going to be huge. Um, and then, but another point that you brought up with LeBron and Zion, which I'm thinking forward to with the Nuggets and Lakers, is just the effort that it takes on defense. And the Lakers didn't have any way to stop Zion, so LeBron started to do it. But he was shooting horrible in that game because he had to expend so much energy
I think he
on
went 6 of
defense.
20.
6 of 20.
He was missing a lot of layups. Like he didn't have a lift on his
Yeah.
jumps. It was probably the worst athletically that I'd seen him for any stretch of a game this season. So that was kind of jarring to me.
Yeah. And it's like hard for fans watching to feel the fatigue of playing. Like we can see it sometimes where they're like breathing heavy or maybe they just don't look like they have the same explosiveness. It's definitely something you have to judge just by watching, but it's sometimes hard to really put it in perspective because you're not feeling it yourself. But like I think about the Nuggets and they're going to be targeting Jamal and Jamal's going to have to be fighting over screens because I know we're not going to want to get into rotation too much. So Jamal's going to have to try and get back to D'Lo, whoever's coming off the screen, and try and get a contest. Um, but on the Lakers end, it's like LeBron's probably going to have to take Jokic at some point because I don't think it's going to be Rui. who's going to be stopping him. I mean, Rui is going to guard Jokic, but LeBron's probably going to do it at some point. And it's like, how tired is LeBron going to be from doing that? Are we going to see the same kind of dynamic we saw just a glimpse of in that Pelicans game where he's getting tired? And I think it's like the same kind of thing. It's like the Lakers are going to try to make Jamal tired on the defensive end. We got to try to make LeBron tired. So we're just going to see how that kind of weighs out. But yeah, those are just my
LeBron has
only.
an ankle thing going on, and
Oh,
Jamal has
does
some
he?
ankle things going on. Yeah, he's still got that thing with the tendon in his ankle, and it's kind of shown up recurrently throughout this season. But he'll like go on a few days rest and come back looking a little bit more spry. So I do expect him to look better, say in game one, but it's not stuff that goes away, especially for someone who's 39 years old.
I was gonna say maybe LeBron was more healthy this time around than last season, but we'll see. But also, we lost what seems like Jimmy Butler and Zion in these playing games. So obviously, that was a big story. Embiid wasn't looking as healthy as maybe people were thinking he would be. There was a lot of criticism of his conditioning, him looking maybe 60% of his normal production. They almost lost that game to the Heat. It was so close. What were your thoughts on some of the other games that were going on?
Yeah, in the East game for the 7 seed for the right to not have to play the Boston Celtics in round 1, that game pretty much went as expected. I thought that Philly should win that game. I knew Miami would be able to muck it up a little bit. I saw some people that thought, that even though the lead was sort of Miami built this, not a huge lead, but a sizable lead through the first half. Even though that lead was dwindling, a lot of people thought that Miami would be able to pull out a game in the clutch. But my feeling throughout that entire second half was that Miami does not want a close game with this team. Miami has not looked good in close games because their offense tends to sputter and they struggle with size on the interior, just like I sort of predicted for this particular matchup. And they struggle to just generate consistent offense. And so I didn't want them to be in a clutch game. And yeah, that kind of is how it played out. Philly was able to pull it off through heroic efforts from Nicholas Batum, and Embiid made some big plays down the stretch. I will say, like, one really big positive about this game was that even though he didn't look great physically, there was never a moment in the second half, particularly like after they started to make their comeback run, where I felt like Embiid had bad body language. There was definitely a lot of that through the first half. It was kind of the whole team. I think that's part of the reason why the Philly crowd was booing them. But in terms of some of the other games that went on in the play-in, the 9-10 game between the Warriors and the Kings did not go how I expected. I obviously predicted the Warriors to win, so I was wrong about that.
Same. I was
But
also
I
wrong.
mean,
Was that
Will,
the
what
only
was
thing we got
your
wrong? Did we?
uh
I think I
yeah, I
picked
think
the Heat.
so.
I picked the Heat to beat the Sixers,
Oh, you picked the Heat.
which
That's
was
right.
much closer than I anticipated. But oh well. Yeah, Warriors. Man, it was a sad kind of ending for them. And as everyone knows, I revel in hating the Warriors. But um, I almost felt bad for a minute, and then I finally was able to enjoy them losing. Just thinking back to the KD Warriors, and one thought that I had in my head as everyone was talking about is this the end of the Warriors dynasty as we know it? Which I think, of course, it is in terms of like the Splash Brothers and Draymond being like the three-headed dragon, so to speak. But I'm more thinking, like this never was a Warriors dynasty. This was the Steph Curry dynasty. And I can't say that that's over because I think the Warriors can retool. I mean, how hard is it to really build around Steph other than that he's not as ball dominant as maybe people are used to playing with other guards? And so, how much do people have to adapt coming into the Warriors and playing with Steph when he's so off ball centric? And I don't know. I assume it should be easy since his gravity is so crazy, but I'm not ready to say that the Steph Curry dynasty is over, but the Splash Brothers, as we used to know them, seems to be over.
Yeah, Clay Thompson went 0 for 10 in from the field in what is possibly maybe 60% likely his last game in a Warriors uniform. Um, the Kings just completely out executed them, outshot them, out defensed them. I actually disagree with you that the Warriors dynasty was a Steph dynasty because I think the Warriors dynasty was as much a defensive dynasty as a jump shooting dynasty. And in each of their title years, they were a top five defense, except for 2018, which was the championship, a championship hangover season for them. They have not been good defensively as a team. It's not just the older players kind of struggling to hang athletically, although that's part of it. But everything about the team having to do with defensive communication, schemes, just everything. And I think, I said Clay went 0 for 10 in this game. Even if he had made every shot and every three, which I think he took three, I think he gave up almost as many points on defense in this game.
Yeah.
I think Mike Brown, for those of you who don't know, the head coach of the Sacramento Kings, he was the head assistant for the Golden State Warriors for several years before he started coaching the Sacramento Kings last season, and I believe he was their defensive coordinator. And a lot of Warriors fans online have lamented his absence
Yeah.
because not only is the Warriors defense worse, but also the Sacramento Kings seem to know exactly how to attack them. Most of the games between these two teams are very close, and it seems like they can't guard each other. But in this game, the Kings were able to get tons and tons of stops on the Warriors, and the Warriors were not able to respond in kind. And so, yeah, I thought this was just a really it felt like the end. It felt
Yeah.
like they went out with a whimper. And so I'm not sure what Golden State is going to do this off season, but whatever it is going to be incredibly consequential because if they
Hmm.
do nothing, this team doesn't have it.
Yeah.
And if they want to be a relevant team really at this point, because they, I think, are a worse they're no, they're not a worse team than their record because their record was obviously pretty bad. They're the 10 seed in the West. Not that they're above 500, but I think their record reflects the quality of their team. They
Yeah.
lost a bunch of these 50-50 games, but there are very uh, tangible problems with the roster um, and the overall approach given their limited personnel that led to some of those games even being close because a lot of those games, those close games that they won, were after they blew big leads. They've been
Yeah.
doing that all season.
And a lot of the fans have been very critical of Steve Kerr, and I think a lot of them are frustrated with him. And it's been kind of a talking point all season with the Warriors and who should start and what are the rotations, and is it time for Steve Kerr to realize that he needs to bench certain players? Uh, he said after the game that he wants Clay back. Clay is done with his contract, so they could theoretically sign him back for cheaper than he probably thought he would get, at least in some negotiations that have been going on this season. And it's partly why Bob Myers quit the Warriors because I don't think he wanted to have these tough conversations with Clay. I don't know if anyone in the Warriors organization is willing to have that tough conversation with Clay. I mean, I could see him coming back as the Andre Iguodala kind of figure that they had in the later years of Iggy's career, where he's the veteran, but he's getting injured all the time, but he's on the bench and he's like a leader. I could see him doing that still if he wanted to be on the Warriors. But if other teams really think he has something to contribute and they want to go after him, maybe they'll entice him away with a good offer. But yeah, they have a lot of questions to answer, it seems. Speaking of
Yeah,
which,
and oh,
no, go
sorry.
ahead, and then I'm going to ask you a question about the Warriors 22 title.
Actually, you could ask me that question first.
Okay, so going along with this Warriors dynasty idea, I may be one who would argue that it wasn't that big of a dynasty if they didn't win the 2022 title, but they did. So I'm not going to argue that they didn't have a dynasty. That being said, was the 2022 title one of the biggest choke jobs in NBA Finals history or just recent NBA Finals history, considering now that we see these Warriors flaming out in such fashion, and it's almost hard to fathom that it was so recent that the Warriors won a title.
So even Draymond has talked on his podcast about how during that championship run in 2022, he didn't feel like this was a championship team, or not like any of the championship teams that he'd been on. And those teams were very, very good 2015, 2017, 2018, obviously, with Kevin Durant. Um, Watching this team now, it feels with like pretty much a lot of the same personnel. It feels so strange to think that they were able to win 4 rounds in the playoffs, and especially the finals against that Boston Celtics team, which, yeah, they had youth and inexperience, but they were a very talented team. They were a very well coached team. I did say earlier that the Warriors were top defenses in all of their championship years, except again 2018 in the regular season anyway. And they were a really great defense. That was a really important uh, defensive playoff run, both for Draymond Green and Andrew Wiggins when they played Luca in the Western Conference Finals. But I just don't understand really watching this Warriors team. I don't know how they beat the Boston Celtics, especially after being down 2-1 in or down 1-2, I guess, in that finals series in 2022. I do think after watching these Warriors this season that this has to be Jason Tatum's year because he can't have another finals where he shoots, 45% from 3, but only 36% from the field. Um, Especially going up against a team that really didn't have rim protection. Like that's the part that I I struggle with understanding after seeing these Warriors operate. Obviously, they were a little bit younger in 22, but again, a pretty similar roster to now. The big difference being the absence of Jordan Poole, who was providing a really important offensive spark for those Warriors in 2022. But I will say, I don't think that Jordan Poole a couple of years ago, even defensively, should have been like allowed to stay on the floor. So that's just one of those things where you wonder how the Boston Celtics weren't able to really compromise this Warriors team, given how limited they clearly are outside of Steph.
Yeah. And if I think we talked about this last episode, but if you've been listening to LeBron and JJ, LeBron has said that the reason the Celtics lost that finals is because Golden State has just a higher basketball IQ than them. And it was true then. I mean, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, they were still relatively young and still learning how to execute at a high level in those big moments. And they kind of got a reputation going on for them in late game situations and trying to get to a good shot. And a lot of people aren't trusting Jason Tatum in those moments and him taking those shots. But here they are now, looking like the best team in the league, one of the best historical teams we've seen, and
At least
everyone's kind of
statistically.
yeah, and everyone's waiting to see how true this is, and are Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown really gonna take it to the level required to finally go all the way? And it's looking promising for them. We'll see. We're gonna go over our brackets and talk about the Celtics as the playoffs go on, of course, because they're gonna be a heavy favorite. But we should move on and talk about some other teams in the first round and move to our setting the stage segment of the podcast. We are going to pit some teams against each other in terms of their stakes and what they have to lose, especially in this first round. Uh, do you want to tell people some teams that we're not going to focus on as heavily and why?
Yeah, there are a couple teams that I feel like are in a low to no pressure situation. I think that the Pacers and the Magic have no pressure on them in round one, whether they go 4 games or 6 games, 7 games. If they win, it's all bonus because these are very young teams that are playing uh, kind of good teams, at least in the case of the Magic, or very good teams in the case of the Pacers. The Knicks, I think, are playing with some house money because a lot of people expect Joel Embiid to be the best player in that series, which gives Philly a chance to win. I think the Knicks believe that they can win that series, but the I don't think that anyone would be terribly disappointed with their season if they went out in 6 or 7 games, say, to Philly.
Hmm.
Obviously,
Especially
don't get swept.
if Embiid plays like we know he can. Yeah.
Right. I think that the Oklahoma City Thunder are in a lower pressure situation. They had an amazing regular season statistically. So I do think that a lot of people would like to see them win a round, but I also don't think that anyone would be shocked if they went out in round one. They might be a little disappointed as a team, as an organization, if they went out in round one, especially if it was like a short series. I doubt that that will happen, though. And then with respect to Denver and Boston, both teams are heavily favored in their round one series. Boston's is not even set yet. These are the top two favorites for the title. So the pressure on them is to make every series as short as possible on their way to the finals. They're almost kind of racing each other there to see who can stay fresh enough by the
Uh,
finals.
yeah, and
But at least in round,
I'll say Boston has a much better first round than the Nuggets now. Now that it looks like if the Heat can pull it off, or if the Bulls pull it off with Jimmy's injury, that's going to
yeah.
be a quick series for Boston. And I don't know that's going to be as
Yeah.
quick with Denver and Lakers, but I
Yeah,
don't
the
think either
pressure
of
with
these
them is
teams,
to
yeah,
make it a short series.
I don't think either of these teams are getting to the underdog status that I think a lot of people want. But yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, do you want to go and jump into the first matchup?
Yeah, so there are a couple the so the Atlanta actually lost to the Bulls last night. I had them
Oh
on
yeah,
here as
so
a
they're
question
out.
mark because they were in the 9-10 game and conceivably, at least theoretically, could have made the playoffs. But
But
they're in
let's
a strange situation.
Yeah, we can still talk about kind of the stakes. Just we have paired kind of Hawks and Cavs together just because they have these star guards who there have tons of questions about their fit and their futures and how that's going to shake out. So why don't you give us your initial thoughts there?
The rumors have been swirling all season, really, about whether the Hawks should trade DeJounte Murray, whether they should trade Trey Young. Are these a good fit? Because the team is about 500 when either plays, and they play below 500 basketball when they both play together. Um, that whole that whole roster is really under question, despite going to the Eastern Conference Finals a couple years ago, because they have really underperformed since then. And then with Cleveland, I think, especially after they tanked the last game of the season by playing their fourth string guys against the Charlotte Hornets after being up in the fourth quarter to try to not get the 2 seed and stay out of potentially Philly's bracket. It would be a really big disappointment to lose in round one to the Orlando Magic. Uh, there are questions, like you said, about the fit of the two guards with Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. Donovan Mitchell got there via trade, and his contract is up this summer, or he has one more year left. But there will be extension talks this summer. So Cleveland is kind of on the clock if they want to maintain leverage in any trade situation to decide if they're going to keep Donovan Mitchell, and he is going to have some say in that if he doesn't feel like this team is really going anywhere. And then there are obviously questions about the front court of the Cavs as well, the fit of Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley. Um, I personally am kind of worried about Evan Mobley's development as a big. Like, he really should be playing as a center, but they have him playing the four a lot when he's playing next to Jarrett Allen. so he's not really able to develop that big skill set as much as a young player. But Cleveland's going to have to make a decision about whether they want to be developing their young players in Garland and Mobley, or keeping them next to these players in Donovan Mitchell and Jared Allen, who are great and excel in their roles a lot of the time, but don't necessarily fit
Yeah,
together.
there's some overlap there for sure. And I love a lot of the conversations going around the league right now in terms of roster building, where you kind of have the Suns who have a lot of talented players, but how much are you really getting when there's some diminishing returns there, like with Beal? But I mean, it doesn't mean the Suns are bad. We'll see how, how it shakes out this postseason. But I mean, yeah, Mobley is just not kind of reaching the standards that a lot of people thought he may get to by now, because he's been in the run for like tons of awards and Rookie of the Year and Defensive Player of the Year. And I think a lot of fans are underwhelmed by him this season. So it's going to be interesting moving forward. I don't have a ton of thoughts on Chicago or Sacramento, other than I think Chicago will look much different than the Kings will look if, going into this offseason and into the next season. Do you have any specific thoughts on Chicago and Sacramento?
I think they're in a similar boat, actually, because they both have shots at the 8 seed right now, depending on what happens tomorrow. But I'm I think both teams could look equally similar or equally different, because both of those front offices don't seem to want to change up too much with their rosters.
Hmm.
But I think both also wanted to have, potentially, in the case of the Bulls, and definitely in the case of the Kings, some playoff sample to understand, like, who are going to be real guys for us versus not, whether they're people that we drafted or traded for. I do think that Sacramento has a decision to make this summer with Malik Monk. I don't know that the decision is necessarily even fully in their hands, because he's going to be commanding a lot of money in free agency, despite his late season injury that's probably going to keep him out of any playoff games, depending on how far Sacramento goes. Uh, and so they're going to have some decisions to make with their salary cap, and whether they want to pay for a team that is substantially more expensive than the one that they have right now, given how they're performing. And it's the case with the Chicago Bulls, as it has been for the last few years. All those same questions are there, but with an even more expensive team than Sacramento even has right now. So I think Chicago's more going to be worried about evaluating their young players, like Kobe White, who dropped a career high 42 points in their blowout win against the Hawks to give them a shot at the 8 seed. Um, but
Yeah,
I had a question to ask you about a
sure.
couple of teams in the Western Conference. There's a lot of high stakes for these star-studded teams in the West, especially in these first round matchups, to where it's kind of a disaster if either team loses in the first round, especially if it's a short series. But who do you think actually has the greatest expectations on them, the Suns or the Wolves?
Yeah, for comparing these two teams, this is such a juicy matchup. I mean, I think the Suns, the way that they're approaching it, just the way their organization is approaching it, where they're going all in on KD, which how can you really fault them for that? Unless they flame out, then people are going to start criticizing that trade a lot more. But they have a really expensive team. Their depth was really hard to acquire, considering the fact that they have a lot of expensive players and salaries. They are pretty much mortgaging their future since they're going all in. They're all in a way that not a lot of teams are, other than maybe like Clippers. And I mean, a lot of these West teams are, even Dallas and Clippers, which we'll get to later. But Minnesota too, because of the Rudy trade. They're expensive. They're going to have some really interesting questions coming up. These salaries are going to get more and more expensive as these years go on. Nas has been a great deal for them, so they're lucky there. But how is that going to shake out? I always said that they could trade Cat going into the season, but he's been pretty unobtrusive, I would say is the word for him. So
But
we'll
is
see.
unobtrusive enough given he's about to be in the first year of his supermax contract,
I think this playoffs might
especially if they
answer.
lose in the first round?
If they lose in the first round and Cat seems like, and I don't know how much, like what percent he's going to be at in terms of like coming off this injuries. Like they going to excuse if he has a bad series, are they going to be like, hey, he was hurt, so it's not a big deal. But I could see them trading him in this offseason if they don't have a great showing. How about you? What are your Suns Wolves thoughts?
Yeah, I think both teams just have a really high amount of pressure on them. While I do think the Suns have uh more at stake, I guess, in terms of the long term, because again, they've traded almost all of their draft picks for Rudy Gobert and like very expensive salaries with Cat and Rudy. A lot is in their front court, and Ant is about to start his rookie scale max extension as well next year. And they have, I think, Kyle Anderson coming up at the end of his deal this summer as well. I think that Minnesota is under more pressure in the short term because of those expiring contracts and the fact of this ownership dispute that's going on now, where two of the co-owners who were trying to buy out the guy who's the majority owner of the Wolves are now not allowed to do that because the current owner said, basically, I changed my mind, but it seems like he's pulling an Elon Musk and trying to find every loophole possible to stop the sale of the team, basically, from going on. And there's all these like leaked documents coming out about how these guys want to cut the salary substantially of this awesome team. But I, who never pays luxury tax, I would never do that. The current owner. And it's just very messy over there. And I do think that an early exit could result in more changes
Hmm.
in the short term. But with the Suns, it's more about, well, if it doesn't work this year, they could try again next year. There's going to be some decline probably with KD and with Beal. Book is still in his prime, still probably he is getting better. But they also have less flexibility to change things moving forward. So that's almost why there wouldn't be big changes. I think if they had more flexibility, the Suns would be in a similar situation to the Wolves, to
Yeah.
where
It's like,
they
what can
could
they
look like
do?
a completely different team next year, but they can't.
Yeah. It's also interesting, like the perceptions of these teams just throughout this regular season affecting these expectations because the Suns were
Yeah.
like in the playing position. People were thinking they may even miss the playoffs, whereas the Wolves were like the new hot team in the West, dominating everybody. And I feel like they kind of met in the middle a little bit where people are starting to question both, but I think people are high on the Suns in terms of beating the Wolves possibly, just schematically. Um, so yeah, the expectations are very close. I think both have young, really solid stars in Ant and Booker. But I think Minnesota may be quicker to pivot away from their identity than the Suns, where the Suns are like, look, like we are a jump shooting, like offensive juggernaut, and we're going to try to put enough effort on defense to give us a chance against any team. Whereas the Wolves are like, very committed to their defensive identity, and I just don't think that that's a way to go in today's NBA. And I think you need more offense. So I could see them shifting away, trying to get more spacing for Ant instead of depending on Ant trying to like make skip passes because everyone's loading up on him and shrinking the floor. So I think Minnesota, and like you said, what can the Suns really do? So Minnesota could look pretty different if things don't go their way. Although
Yeah.
Tim Connolly is the GM over there, and we Nuggets fans
For
know,
now,
yeah, for now. Oh yeah, maybe he'll leave
he
with
has
this
not
whole
been
dispute.
extended.
Yeah, he might
Yeah.
be angry about this whole ownership dispute, but we can get into that stuff later. It is very interesting. So let's move though to the Mavs and Clippers.
So I do think that there's a little bit more of a disparity in the pressure on these two teams compared to the Suns and Wolves. The Mavs always have the pressure of having Luka, who is perennially a top 5 player in the NBA, and trying to make sure that they're building around him in such a way that makes their team competitive. I think they've done a decent job of that this year. They are in a situation where they do lack flexibility, though. So hopefully, the moves that seem to have worked actually do work in a playoff context. Like I don't think that Luca would be happy if they had a first round exit that happened because the team around him wasn't good enough. But with Kyrie there, with Derek Lively there, and Daniel Gafford, who have helped their defense, their rim protection, their rebounding, which has always been an issue for this team. They feel like a more coherent basketball team that isn't just Luca go save us. Um, they can play defense now. They've had a really good defense since the trade deadline. It feels a lot like the Lakers run post trade deadline last season, where they looked like the best team in the NBA toward the end of the year. And we'll just see if that can carry over because we saw how the difference in how the Lakers looked this season compared to those expectations. But the difference there is that Luca is still a top 5 player and he's in his prime or entering his prime now. He just turned 25. If they do go out early, I don't think that Luca will be happy about it, but I think it depends on how it looks, like what was the texture of that series.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, with the Clippers, you have a very aging core in Kawhi and Paul George, who is not as old as Kawhi, but he's now in his 30s, and James Harden and Russell Westbrook. Uh, the major financial stakes for this team have more to do with who has not yet signed an extension. They haven't had extension talks, or shouldn't have had extension talks yet, with James Harden, as they had just traded for him yet. But I expect that if they do well in this playoffs, that they'll want to extend him because they finally have a point guard that helps them have an organized offense. And they looked really good for a stretch of the season. But Harden has not looked good down the stretch of the season on either end of the floor. And so he's got some stakes in this personally, especially because he forced his way out of Philadelphia so that he could go to a team that was more likely going to sign him to closer to a max extension, which I think the Clippers would if they did well in this playoffs, especially after the regular season that they had overall. But Paul George has yet to sign an extension, and the Clippers have been in extension talks with him for months. And I'm not sure if part of it has to do with the fact that Kawhi took a slight haircut on his max extension, and maybe they're trying to get Paul George to do the same, and he doesn't want to because he thinks he could get a better deal in free agency this summer. I think a lot of people have noted that Kawhi, Paul George, and Westbrook are all from LA. I think what Harden is too, even though he has family in Houston. So the LA boys probably want to stay in the area. But if you can get a better financial deal from a different team, which in this case, a lot of rumors have been swirling about Philadelphia maybe targeting Paul George this summer if the Clippers don't want to give him the full max extension. So there's just a lot of like individual interests that have really come into play at the end of this season, and with the Clippers limping toward the finish line of the regular season going into this first round matchup with the Mavs, who have been like the hottest team in the NBA basically down the stretch. It's just shaky to try to understand what that's going to look like on the court, especially with the fact that Kawhi has missed several games. For he missed I think the last 3 weeks of the season with knee soreness. And whenever it's Kawhi and his knees, you have to be worried, right? Because
Yeah.
you never know if he's going to be able to play one game, two games, any games at all. And that team needs Kawhi in order to be competitive, especially against a good team like the Dallas Mavericks.
Yeah, the Clippers. Oh man, there's much to think about with these two teams. They're kind of. I think the Mavs still have the biggest pressure to perform because they need to keep Luca. Like Luca is a franchise player who can have years and years and years. the Clippers are not going to have PG and Kawhi for that long. They've already played on other teams. They've already had success on other teams. So they're at the twilight of those two. I think I don't know how certain it is that PG leaves, but I could see him going to the Sixers. I could see PG really wanting to win a championship, and I don't think he'll care about leaving LA to go and try and join up with some more consistent players. Although it'd be funny to trade in Kawhi for Embiid, the two weak knee players. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't think that's happening. But I
So,
will say that on the Clippers pressure, they also have a new arena opening up next year. So in terms of financial pressure for the organization, part of the uh, sell of the James Harden trade was that they would at least have a good regular season team because Harden tends to be a really good floor raiser in the regular season. Whereas the with the Clippers the last couple of years, the bottom can really fall out when one of Kawhi or PG is out, as they have been intermittently and for long stretches, especially in the case of Kawhi, since those two partnered up in LA. So I don't. I would disagree that the Mavs as an organization have more pressure on them. Like you have to keep Luca happy, but if Luca wanted to leave, you could trade him for a lot of draft capital. I don't know that the Clippers would get a useful haul in their situation, given that what they need to do is put butts in seats. They don't need
mhm,
draft capital; they need stars
they need fans.
for their new
Yeah.
arena.
Yeah, I wonder what direction they may pivot if they are going to move off of Kawhi and PG. I've just kind of convinced myself that this is the last try for this group on the Clippers. I mean, James Harden will probably still be there, but I don't know what kind of players they're going to bring in to bolster this team. Whereas I think losing Luca would be a complete disaster for the Mavs. Let's move on now to Bucks Sixers, who are not playing each other in the first round. We're not pitting them together for that reason. We are because they are in a similar situation where their two best players, well, respectively, their number one players on each team, are dealing with some nagging injuries. I don't really know how limited Embiid is right now. I don't know how close Giannis is right now to coming back. But I think the Bucks, I mean, they're a little bit older. They don't have this like Maxi type player on their team. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a worry. Their backcourt is very weak defensively and old because Dame is older. No offense to you, Dame. But yeah, well, man, if Embiid goes out in the first round and he's hurt again, I feel like people will still make excuses like, well, he was hurt, obviously. So,
He's
I
always
think they're
hurt.
yeah,
Is the
he's
thing.
always hurt. Are they going to move off him? Probably not. Would Embiid ask out of Phoenix or of Philly? Probably not because he's just trying to have one healthy playoff run. I
I
don't know how.
mean, he was trolling about it last summer
Yeah.
about whether he wants to win a chip, whether it's in Philly or somewhere
Mm,
else, and then quickly backtracked on Twitter saying he was trolling.
yeah.
But
I feel like Embiid would be a player who would try to go somewhere else, but I mean, he's kind of said both things where he's embraced Philly and the fans. So
you
maybe
never know
he
with
will
these
stay.
guys.
But Giannis has also made some comments about not wanting to sign an extension if they weren't competitive, which he did after the Dame trade. But
He sure did.
he can always ask for a trade. Dame doesn't have that long to go. I kind of feel like both of these teams are going to run it back next year, regardless of what happens. And if it's like a disaster for some reason, maybe make some trades at the deadline. But I don't know how much either of these teams are going to change next year.
I will say, like you mentioned that Philly still has Maxi, if nothing else. They also have more draft capital and a little bit more financial
Yeah,
flexibility.
they
They
have
don't have
huge
quite
cap
as
space.
old. Yeah, they don't have quite as old a roster. The cap space can be used in free agency. It can also be used in trades. Probably why those rumors have been swirling about Philly targeting Paul George potentially this summer. But you're right. They're both teams have these MVP level players who are not out of their prime, but entering the later parts of their prime that rely a lot on their athleticism to be most effective. And I don't doubt that these guys can be very effective both in the regular season and potentially the playoffs in the case of Embiid, but they need a little bit more help around them. So I think Maxey has been so great for Philly this year. He has his rookie scale extension coming up this summer. The Sixers did not sign him to that extension last summer when they could have. I thought that was a little odd, frankly, because Maxi had already demonstrated the um, more than enough, in my opinion, to sign him to that extension. And I didn't like the idea of leaving him hanging for a year playing for that contract when they could have extended him last year. But that's Daryl Morey, the GM of the Sixers, for you.
Hmm.
But in the case of the Bucks, they just have really no flexibility. I think that a big question this summer, if they do not just flame out in the playoffs, but I think that they need to make the Eastern Conference Finals for there to be no changes to the roster. If they don't do that, there are questions. And even if they do, considering the goal for teams when they have a player that good is championships, or at least making the finals, the only not just tradable piece but desirable trade piece that I think the Bucks have right now is Brooke Lopez. There were teams that were going after him last summer in free agency, and he ended up staying in Milwaukee, which really helped the team out because if he had left, then they would have just lost that salary space entirely. He could have gone to Houston, and that would have been a disaster, really, for Milwaukee, and probably would have hindered Şengün's development with the
Mm.
Rockets as well.
Oh God, yeah.
But Houston might still be interested in Brooke Lopez as either a backup or I don't know, playing like a weird stretch four role. Memphis is a team that's always looking for bigs.
Mm.
The Nets are probably going to lose Nick Claxton in free agency this summer, so maybe they're looking to replace their starting center. And so I just wanted to put those teams out there because I think the Brooke Lopez situation is interesting, not only because he's their most tradable trade piece or most desirable trade piece, but because uh, that team is so lacking in youth and athleticism. And I don't think that Brooke is like the problem there, but he doesn't help in that he's older. He's still a great rim protector, which is why he is desirable to potentially one of these other teams. I do think that the Bucks will consider trading him because they should to put a younger, more athletic team around Giannis, uh, who needs a little bit of help in that regard. Like that
Hmm.
team is really unathletic outside of him, and it shows,
Yeah.
especially when he's out. Which is why the Pacer series is going to be very interesting, very fast-paced team that's really going to push them on both ends of the floor. I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're definitely gonna move off like campaign, and I would advise them to move off of Malik Beasley.
Well,
Uh,
they
I,
traded campaign already. They traded him for
oh
Pat
yeah,
Bev.
for Pat Bev. Yes, sorry, I meant
Yeah,
Pat Bev. I don't know. I guess we'll see how Pat Bev is in the playoffs. I think it was the right move to probably start him over Malik. Uh, they finally benched him. They just need better. They need a better defensive, effective, young, cheap guard to pair with Dame, I think. So, in that sense, I think they should always be looking for that. But in terms of like changing the big core of Dame and Middleton and Giannis, I guess they'd have to like really be horrible in this first round to really get there. Um, but like you said, I guess if they don't make the Eastern Conference Finals, that might be enough that they'd want to do it. I don't know. We will find out. But speaking of these teams, let's pick our playoff picks. Do you want to go first? Or,
you can go first.
okay, so we are going to each pick our first round right now. Let's go. So, first up is Celtics Heat. Wow, this is so hard. Celtics. For me personally.
Non-believer.
Oh, also, this could be the Bulls in the first round versus the Celtics. We still don't know.
Yeah,
But I don't care who's coming out of that game. The Celtics are going to win that series. Um,
you doubt the Heat at your own peril.
yes. And then, of course, I have Mavs over Cavs, which I think you're influencing me there. But I will be rooting for the
They're
Magic.
magic.
I will be rooting for
Yeah.
the Magic over the Cavs. So then with Bucks Pacers, I have This was a tough one, even though we don't know where Giannis is at in his recovery. I'm still gonna pick the Bucks because I'm just not ready to go against them, and the Pacers have weaknesses and are inconsistent. So I just went Bucks here. Uh, um, Knicks Sixers. I'm going Knicks because I'm rooting for them, and then OKC, of course, picking them,
Youngest one seed,
the
like
youngest one
ever.
seed, and they will. I have them matching up with Dallas in the second round. Then with Wolves, Suns. I'm picking. This may surprise you, the Wolves.
Ooh,
And
fun.
then, of course, I'm going to pick the Nuggets for the first round. So why don't you give your picks and then we can kind of go through some of these interesting teams that we're going to end up picking.
Yeah, so I also am a non-believer of this season's Miami Heat. I actually think they might lose to the Bulls in the play-in game, especially with Jimmy's out with an MCL tear. Like the runway for the Celtics is almost fully clear. Um, so I'm gonna go with Celtics here. I also picked the Magic over the Cavs because I have so many questions about the how the Cavs are gonna fit with each other, like with their starting lineup. But I think the Magic have a firm identity. That identity is not a good offensive team, but they know who they are and they basically play the same way every game. Um, I don't know that the
Yeah.
Cavs know who they are.
As someone who
Uh,
watches the Magic though a lot really quickly, like how confident are you in this Magic pick? Like are you like feeling really good
yeah,
or is it like a coin toss kind of thing?
it is a coin toss, but because it has more to do with my lack of faith in the Cavs than my faith in the
Okay.
Magic. I actually would have had the Magic going out in the first round against any other Eastern Conference opponent. It's just that the Cavs have, um, especially offensively, like I just don't really believe in that team, and I think that they can get potentially frazzled by physicality. Now the Magic are a very young team. This will be their first time of everyone in the starting lineup except Wendell Carter Jr. I think experiencing playoff physicality, and who knows, maybe the Cavs will bring it, especially after they got punked last year. Um, but I think that the Magic have a shot, and you don't want to give a young team like that confidence because they could beat you.
Right. And the Cavs did just kind of tank in an embarrassing fashion in the
They
last
did, and
day
that
of the
is plenty
season.
of
So
bulletin board material
yeah, and that karma can come
for
back to
Paolo,
you.
for Franz. Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't think the basketball gods are on the side of the Cavaliers right now.
So how about Bucks Pacers? Who are you going with?
I've got the Bucks. Look, if Giannis doesn't come back for any game in this series, Indiana is my heavy favorite, but I think the Bucks can survive a cup like 2 or 3 games without Giannis, maybe even 4. I think that they could take 2 games off the Pacers without Giannis. But if they can keep the series effectively tied and then Giannis comes back, I just think that he has too much for the Pacers offensively. And yeah, the Pacers are a younger team, less experienced, and even though the Bucks have Doc Rivers, it's they also have Giannis potentially. So I'm gonna go there.
So you meant even though they have Doc Rivers is like
Yeah,
they're going to be okay despite him.
yeah. I think that the
Sorry,
Pacers have a
Doc.
coaching advantage.
Yeah.
Um, I think Rick Carlisle's a really he's like a good adjustments coach, especially offensively. Like you don't get
Yeah,
to
he
be
is.
the number two offense. They were number one for a lot of the season in the first half. Number two offense on the season without, especially when your best player is a guard, without knowing how to make adjustments. And I think Carlisle's really good with that. And the Pacers have a more multi pronged attack now that they have Siakam
Yeah, do you think
with
Siakam is
Halliburton.
going to have a good series versus the Bucks?
I think he will because even though Brooke is going to be a problem at the rim, I think the Pacers could play him off the floor.
Oh.
Ideally, that doesn't happen before Giannis comes back because you don't want to have a Bobby Portis at the 5 as the only big kind of series. But even with when I think that both these teams pose issues for each other, but Giannis could overcome that if he's able to play. But if he's not, then I think the Pacers end up being a lot better built for a playoff series in terms of just being able to make adjustments offensively. I don't know about defensively, but they might not have to worry about their defense if Giannis isn't able to play.
All right, next pick, Knicks Sixers.
I'm gonna go with the Knicks here. The Knicks would have been my favorite even before I saw Embiid look not so
Hmm.
great physically, but I would have had it as a 6, maybe 7 game series before. I think the Knicks could potentially finish this up in 4 or 5 if they come in with the right game plan and just kind of run the Sixers out of the gym. The Sixers don't have great perimeter defenders. They might put Nicholas Batum on Jalen Brunson, but I think Tibbs is going to figure out how to get Brunson open off of Nico Batum, and the Knicks are going to be able to capitalize on the defects in the Philly defense, especially with Joel playing a more conservative drop coverage compared to what Miami was able to do. They are a substantially
Mm-hmm.
better offense than Miami Heat.
I think Knicks might be able to get by because Embiid, if he's not 100%, then the best player in the series is going to be Brunson. And I think, it's going to be easier to stop Embiid if he's not his best. And Brunson, he's just going to have that incredible shot making. And I'm definitely pulling for you, Knicks. So we'll see. But who knows? Nurse is a good coach. So I don't know. I've liked what
He
he's
is a good
done.
coach,
I've
and
really
they
liked
do
what he's
have
done.
Tyrese Maxey.
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't really seen him in this role in the playoffs yet. So he could really go off and be a game changer. It's gonna be interesting. All right. OKC and we have the King. I put the Kings in the spot just because I was assuming they're gonna beat the Pelicans without Zion. But it could be the Pelicans. But who are you gonna have OKC and Kings Pelicans?
I do think that OKC wins regardless. I think the Kings could take OKC to a longer series just because the Kings have a more experienced playoff coach in Mike Brown compared to Willie Green. And
Hmm.
also, Zion has this hamstring thing that's going to keep him out for at least a couple of weeks if the Pelicans do advance. And I just don't think they're going to make it that far. I think that from what I've seen when these two teams play each other, one team has a more defined offensive identity than the other one. And when it comes down to a close game, I'm not going to trust almost anyone uh, else more than the Thunder. Obviously, the Nuggets are
Yeah.
number one there, even though OKC beat us in the clutch in that one game.
Keegan Murray had such a good game against the
He
Warriors,
did.
and
Keegan Murray could be huge in that series.
yeah, I really hope the Kings pull this out just because I don't want them to, they finally made the playoffs last season, and I would be really sad for them if they were already out the next season. But I think they have a good chance, not against the Thunder, but to make the playoffs. And I would
Yeah.
like to see these young teams go at each other. Although I would like it if Malik Monk was able to play. So unfortunate. All right, let's go with Mavs Clippers.
I got the Mavs here. I think they have the best player in the series. And I think the Mavs could force the Clippers to go small ball. And if you play Zubats off the floor, the Clippers defense pretty much crumbles, and it's already been pretty bad down the stretch of the season. Um, but even if the Mavs go small to force the Clippers to go small, like their small ball is a lot bigger. So they'll probably get the rebounding edge and they'll be able to like set screens,
Hmm.
which I find to be very important. I just think that the Mavs have more effective counters for what LA is probably going to try to do on both ends of the floor.
I love that these two teams are facing each other from a Nuggets fan perspective. Both have been lauded as Nuggets killers at one point or another. It was the Clippers when they were on their impressive run, and then it was the Mavs kind of towards the end of the season. And both, I give them respect for both playing really well in spurts. I'm definitely more afraid of the Mavs than I am the Clippers right now. But I just am wondering, are the Clippers going to flip some kind of switch and not be horrible on defense anymore?
I think if Kawhi plays, the Clippers have a much better chance. I don't think it's a short series if Kawhi plays. If he doesn't, it's Mavs in 4 or 5, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Uh, but if he does play, it could go 6 or 7, and I could see either team winning. But he has to be able to play more than like 2 games.
yeah, definitely.
Because I don't think that the Mavs really have great answers for Kawhi, but I think they have better answers for Kawhi than the Clippers have answers for Luca. It might just be Kawhi is the best person to guard Luca. PG actually could do a
Hmm,
pretty good job too because Luca sometimes gets frustrated with like longer defenders who are also strong. You just don't tend to get the
yeah,
same those two things in the same person.
yeah. It'll be interesting. Okay, now please give me your Wolves Suns pick.
I've got the Suns here. You had the Wolves, and I think they can win that series, but they will have to break a curse in order to do it. It would be, I think, an amazing story if the Wolves were able to break their curse of not winning a round one series since Kevin Garnett took them to the Western Conference Finals. But I think the Suns are a bad matchup for them. Uh, I don't think it's going to be a short series either way, but I'm going to give the edge to Phoenix here because even though I hate their offensive process, their offense is more trustworthy than the Timberwolves.
Yeah, I'm kind of going against some of my personal philosophies here, going with the Wolves because I do think offense is that much more important than defense in this day and age. No offense to you coaches out there and you analytics aficionados. I just think offense, you got to score in today's NBA. Like we have all these discussions about how the rules maybe need to change to favor the offense less. And I just, yeah, even though, but so I am going against that thinking with picking the Wolves. I hear a lot of talk about the Suns being a bad matchup because they always try to take away a ton from the offense, but what they give up is these short range jumpers and floaters, which the Suns are amazing at. So they're gonna have
They're
to
like, "Oh, yeah, that's the shot I
yeah,
wanted to take. I didn't
yeah.
even wanna go all the way to the rim,
Hmm.
so that's fine. You guys, you stand back there, and I'll just take my pull-up jumper."
Yeah. So the Wolves, I think, are gonna have to come in from the get go already adjusting and playing in a way that they're not used to if they want to get ahead of this. But I'm just kind of like I'm trying not to overthink this. The Suns kind of melt down. They've had weird spurts this season, and I'm just like the Wolves. They've been so good. I'm just gonna pick the Wolves and give them some credit. But we'll see how it goes. It's gonna be a close one, and we're
I
gonna be
hope the
talking
Wolves
about this a
win.
lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. All right, Nuggets Lakers. Are you going to surprise everyone?
Lakers in 6. Just kidding. Okay, it's the
Just
Nuggets.
kidding.
Just kidding. I don't think that this is gonna be a short series, as in 4 or 5 games. 5 or 6. The Nuggets have the best player in the series. They have a more reliable offense. I know the Lakers have been an amazing offense ever since they put Rui back in the lineup. But as we discussed earlier, I think it has more to do with D'Angelo Russell having a more consistent role in the rotation. He was like not starting for a large chunk of the season in the first half, and their offense really struggled. But I do think that the Nuggets will be able to at least neutralize D'Lo's impact on the offense with how much he's giving up on the other end of the floor. And it's not just about taking D'Lo one on one, putting him into all kinds of actions. I also think that that both LeBron and AD struggle to maintain their effort throughout the course of a full game. And the Nuggets know that. They really challenged their stamina and their endurance over the course of that series. They have home court advantage. They're going to have the altitude. They're going to have the crowd. Um, And they might have the second best player in the series too. They did last year when Jamal
Hmm.
pretty soundly outplayed LeBron in, I think, 3 out of 4 games in that series.
Yeah.
And really, when you think about the game-winning, not block, but Jamal kind of stopped LeBron on that drive, and then AG was able to block it. You could say that Jamal outplayed LeBron in that game too.
Yeah,
I don't
he
know that
did.
that will necessarily be the case in this series. It might be a lot closer to a draw, or maybe LeBron is a bit better. But I do think that obviously Jokic is going to outplay AD. Uh, but yeah,
Hmm.
they have everything they need, and hopefully they get it done quickly.
Yeah, if they want to be competitive in this series and not get swept, LeBron has to be better than Murray, which obviously he's capable of.
Yes, he's
But
LeBron James,
yeah, but
but
it
it's
wasn't
playoff
the
Jamal.
case. Yeah, but it's also play of Jamal. Like they just have to be equal at least. But I don't know. We're gonna be talking about Nuggets Lakers so much. So let's
Yeah.
each give our second round picks, and then we'll just go through and talk about any interesting points or differences that we have. So continue on with your bracket, and let's go with Celtics and Magic.
Yeah, I got the Celtics here. I think the Celtics should probably sweep the Magic. Maybe they get a game where they out rebound them or something. But yeah, Celtics in a short number of games. Um, Knicks Bucks is interesting.
Who you
I
got?
do think I'm going to give it to the Knicks, despite it being closer to 50-50 in my head, because of everything that I laid out with the Bucks stakes. They're not an athletic team. The Knicks don't normally push pace, but they can. And the Bucks will have absolutely nothing for Jalen Brunson because of how limited they are on the perimeter. Uh, so even though the Bucks have 2 stars and the Knicks only have one, I'm gonna go Knicks and probably like Knicks in 6.
Okay, let's keep going down the list. OKC
Uh,
Mavs.
Give me the Mavs over the Thunder. Uh, and then obviously I'm gonna take the Nuggets over the Suns, even though that's gonna be an annoying series.
Yeah, I am pretty close with some differences. Of course, I did pick the Celtics to beat the Magic, but I would love if there was an upset there.
That'd
Then,
be crazy,
yeah,
genuinely.
then I had, let's see, I picked the Bucks to beat the Knicks just because the Knicks people refer to the Knicks getting to the West or the Eastern Conference Finals as like the Linsanity run or in getting to the finals, and I'm like, there's a reason why that is because
Yeah,
their
yeah.
expectations are a little low. So I don't think that it's out of the possibility that the Knicks can win. They definitely can get to the Eastern Conference Finals, and I hope that they do. But I'm still gonna pick the Bucks and their consistency and talent with Middleton and Giannis. And Dame might hit some clutch game winners. You never know. He could be the difference maker. Um,
It's true.
then I'm gonna go Dallas over OKC. Dallas is gonna be too savvy for them, I think. And then for I have Nuggets Wolves in a series, and I'm going to pick the Nuggets. I think they're going to figure it out. So our only difference was Bucks Knicks. If the
Yeah, basically.
I know you didn't pick Wolves to beat the Suns, but if it was Wolves Nuggets, do you have? I know it's like a very tough matchup for them, but would you still be confident the Nuggets get it done?
I think I'd still pick the Nuggets. Whereas, I mean, honestly, both matchups are annoying. I wouldn't say that that Phoenix is a tough matchup, but they're an annoying matchup. Mini is a tough matchup just because of how well they match up defensively with the Nuggets' best players. But um, I think that the Wolves series is difficult offensively for the Nuggets, and the Sun series is difficult defensively, just because there's so much that you have to be crisp in execution on either end of the floor when you're facing those teams. Uh, and also one has substantially more annoying fan base. Um,
Mm,
I would actually
yes.
prefer. I wouldn't mind seeing another Wolves series against the Nuggets. It would be tough, but Nuggets have home court. I think that they I think that they know that they could beat either of those teams.
Yeah.
They beat both of those teams last year, though
Yeah.
very or slightly different with slightly different constructions due to some injuries that happened last year. The Suns like totally remade their roster. Um, but yeah, I'm gonna go with the Nuggets either way.
And that brings
Do
us
you,
to
do
the
you change your answer if it's Phoenix over the Wolves?
oh man. No, I'm still gonna go Nuggets for sure, even though I know there's interesting questions with Suns and Nuggets in terms of, you know, the Suns putting Nuggets in rotation with their shot creators and their spacing and they're spreading them out. But I still think Nuggets just have more consistent looks and can get into those looks easier against the Suns, whereas the Suns have to be like almost perfect, I think, to beat the Nuggets. And it's like that
Yeah,
question of effort and like who is getting more comfortable more often. And I think the Nuggets will be in that series. All right, let's go to conference finals. So you have Celtics Knicks.
yes. I'm gonna go with the Celtics here. They have the runway. They should make the finals. And then I do think that the Mavs are a tougher matchup for the Nuggets than obviously the Knicks are for the Celtics, but I'm going to still pick the Nuggets. I think they'll have the best player in that series. They might not, but I think they could win regardless. Luke is really good.
Yeah,
Um,
I would be scared
and
of
Jamal will
any of
have to
those.
outplay NBA champion Kyrie Irving, both NBA champions,
It's the
actually,
battle of the
as the
champions.
number twos, as really 1Bs in really contested championship runs. So it'll be interesting, but I think the Nuggets should win that
Yeah.
if they're trying. Like they got beat by the Mavs playing like one of the worst games that I saw them play of the season in Dallas, and they lost on a Kyrie game winner.
Mm, don't
So
remind me.
yeah, I'm gonna go with the Nuggets.
I'm also going to be predictable and pick Celtics and Nuggets for the finals. It's the finals that everyone is saying is going to happen, which almost makes it like scary to pick because it's like we're
It
all picking it.
does.
But
It does.
those Cavs Warriors years were also just as predictable and they did happen every single time. So we'll
But
see.
were there better teams? Are there better teams now in terms of the competition, at least in the West? Like
Yeah, in the
I think a
East,
lot of
no.
people I think a lot of people think if it's not Celtics Nuggets in the finals, it's because the Nuggets don't make the finals. And I think
Yeah,
that's entirely possible because a lot of teams in the West are really, really good. I think it would be so strange if the Celtics didn't make the finals to me at this point.
yeah, I agree. I as much as it pains me to say, because I want the Nuggets to be as solid of a pick as the Celtics are. The West is just more competitive, so
Yeah.
it's just gonna happen. So with that, we will make our final picks for the champion, which is a tough one.
I'm gonna go with the Nuggets because I am a Nuggets fan and I think that they can win. I think they should win. They'll have the best player in the series. The Celtics are as close to a super team you can get without being a super team, but they're not a super team.
Hmm.
Despite being a juggernaut and like dominating their conference, I think that statistically they look awesome. But and I think they're a great team. Like I don't want to downplay the Celtics to the point where I am underestimating them. I think they're a great team, but I don't think that they are as good as their statistics show. I think they're beatable,
Yeah, I have to pick the Nuggets. I'm definitely
contractually obliged.
yeah, I'm obligated to do it. Um,
Yeah,
but I do like that you, because I think if you really thought like I think it actually is a tough pick for you. Like I think you're like, man, the Celtics are really good, and I know that you would really pick them if you like. And I think it was close. So I like that you picked the Nuggets anyway. I know that you have some questions about Boston, especially digging into them in that finals that they blew. And I think you've also mentioned that you think given their record or their point differential that their record didn't meet that this season. So they're not as uh,
infallible.
yeah, as infallible as some people would make them out to be. But it is hard to pick the Nuggets, even though I know the Celtics are the favorite. But that's just how it is going to be. So with that, that'll conclude our first part of this episode. And look out for our second part where we go over NBA awards. So we will see you there. And until next time, NBA fans.